My name is Michael Taylor. I am the museum's artistic director and chief curator, and it gives me immense pleasure to welcome you to tonight's special event. It's a very highly anticipated lecture entitled VMFA's History-Making Art Loan to Lusanga in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So tonight's speaker, Dr. Ndubuisi Ezeluomba, known affectionately as Ndy, began his role as VMFA's Curator of African Art in May 2022. A specialist in the visual and expressive arts of Africa, Ndy was born and raised in Benin City, Nigeria, where he initially trained as an artist and received his bachelor's degree in fine and applied arts from the University of Benin. It was in graduate school at the University of Ibadan that he switched to art history and wrote his master's thesis on the contemporary Nigerian sculptor Obi Ekwenchi. Ndy moved to the United States and completed his PhD in art history from the University of Florida, Gainesville in 2017. During his studies at the University of Florida, Ndy worked with the Hahn Museum of Art's curatorial team to produce Congo Across the Waters, a 2013 traveling exhibition that used an interdisciplinary approach to explore the art of the Congo peoples of Central Africa and the transmission of their culture through the transatlantic slave trade into American art. He was also a consultant on the Hahn Museum's 2015 exhibition, Elusive Spirits, African Masquerades. In 2017, he earned the University of Florida's Graduate School Doctoral Dissertation Award for his dissertation, Olokun Shrines, Their Functions in the Culture of the Benin-Speaking People of Southern Nigeria. Between 2016 and 2018, Ndy was the Andrew W. Mellon Research Specialist in African Art at VMFA and participated in a groundbreaking collaborative project with the museum's curators and conservators and supported by a major grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. And it's gone very dark, but we have Richard Woodward in the audience somewhere, I think back there, who spearheaded this project, and it was a delight. Here he is. So it's a delight to see you again. This project resulted in the 2021 publication, The Arts of Africa, Studying and Conserving the Collection. In 2018, Ndy was appointed as the Françoise Billion Richardson Curator of African Art at the New Orleans Museum of Art, where he organized the exhibition Ancestors in Stone, Body Adornment in African Art. After returning to VMFA in 2022, he has been working on a number of exhibits, including co-curating with Kimberly Gant the acclaimed exhibition Black Orpheus, Jacob Lawrence and the Mbari Club, which was shown at the Chrysler Museum of Art in 2022, and later traveled to the New Orleans Museum of Art and the Toledo Museum of Art. Ndy co-edited the accompanying catalog, which was published by Yale University Press, and has contributed articles and book chapters to numerous publications. His articles have appeared in African Arts, Black Art Quarterly, Hyperallergic, and the Routledge Encyclopedia of African Studies. Ndy's other publications include Cultural Patrimony and Discussion of the 1897 Invasion of the Benin Kingdom, Some Questions for Arts Management in Arts Management and Cultural Policy Across the African Diaspora, which was published in 2022. Benin Art, Changes Through Time and Space in the Literature and Arts of the Niger Delta, 2021. And finally, the development of the exhibition of African art in American museums, strategy for engaging the recent repatriation debate about the cultural property of Benin in museum innovation, building more equitable, relevant, and impactful museums. And that came out in 2020. In April of this year, Ndy's essay entitled Ethical Stewardship of African Art Collections in North American Museums will be published in New African Masquerades, Artistic Innovations and Collaborations, accompanying an exhibition at the New Orleans Museum. As all of these publications attest, and there are many more, Dr. Ezeluomba is a thought leader in his field, and his contributions were recognized in 2024 when he received a Fulbright Award to carry out fieldwork in Nigeria to study shrines and rituals dedicated to Olokun. And he combined these trips to Nigeria, which are ongoing, with his work on a commission for a spectacular 20 feet tall Ijele masquerade that is being specially created for VMFA's collection. In addition to his scholarship, Ndubuisi has also made a number of outstanding acquisitions for the African art collection at VMFA. Tonight, Dr. Ndubuisi Ezeluomba will discuss how VMFA became the first major American art museum to lend a work from its permanent collection to a sub-Saharan African institution. Please join me in welcoming Ndi to the podium.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Michael, for that generous introduction. I don't know how Michael does that, but he knows how to give very powerful presentation, and don't know if I should claim everything he presents sometimes. But, it is good that we are here tonight, and we are going to be talking about a very fascinating, call it voyage, that I embarked on in the spring of last year. Before I begin my talk tonight, I'll first of all make a very subtle but clear declaration. I would like to clear the air about some misconceptions about the piece we will be talking about tonight, which is that one in front of you. The object was not stolen. It was acquired and have changed hands, as most great artworks have over time. The VMFA acquired it in 2015 and have exhibited and loaned it to other institutions that have had the need for it. Therefore, I will be speaking about the piece and how it has, filtered, or it has made this remarkable history of, traveling. What I want to call voyage again. But before I speak about the journeys that me and the sculptural piece took from the spring of last year, I think I'll just do a very small introduction of the object, because it is always good to give context to what we are talking about. The sculpture in front of you, I am not going to go into very deep detail about the meaning or what the work entails, but I think a little history will help set the work in context, and then from there we can then speak to other ideas. The sculptural piece in front of you is the image of a colonial officer that was stationed in the Kwilu region of the Congo during colonialism. The story and the name of the colonial officer is Maximilian Ballot. The story of Maximilian Ballot was the story of a colonial worker that was killed by African people. But the killing of the colonial officer would eventually be understood as the case of accidental killing, of mistaken identity. Right around 2015, my predecessor, Richard Woodward, had acquired this piece from a professor of political history, Herbert Weiss. And then the sculptural object was in the museum. Right around that time, imbued with the mind of curiosity, Richard Woodward and his team that was working in the museum, they started looking at the object and kind of grappling with its uniqueness. While they were working on that object, Richard Woodward was able to, continue conversation with the professor of political history, Herbert Weiss, and then he found another professor at Columbia University, Zoe Strutter, who is a specialist in Mpende art, and the three of them sat and wrote an article that was published in African Art. And the volume of that African Art is volume 49, number 1, spring of 2016. In this article that these three experts sat to write, they were able to, the historian was able to kind of dig into the history of that piece. And then Richard, who was also finding the intriguing, or that had an eye shot looking for the intrigues that constitute the piece, was also looking at a very important part, which was why the title of the piece became Art with a Fight and 8. So, looking at this piece from the perspective of the historian, from the perspective of the professor of the political history of the Congo, we were made to understand that Ballot, was this colonial administrator, and we all know how the activities of colonialism affected Congolese people right around that time in the 1930s. And I will also make it clear that it was through the activities of both this colonial administration as well as the outbursts that happened at different times that led to a situation that eventually led to the death of Maximilian Ballot. According to Herbert Weiss, there was an incident where some company was given the right to go into this Kwilu region to go collect taxes and also get their men to go and work in the plantations. Knowing the consequences of going to work in plantations, a lot of the men refused to. So, when the people that were sent to go to that village got to the village, they couldn't find men in the village. So out of anger, the guy who was in charge of that group, actually a lot of the people who was working for them were Congolese people who were like auxiliaries to them. They came to the village, and then he instructed them to go back to the village and seize whatever things they have in the village. And they did that, including chicken and everything, just as a way to punish the men who had left without wanting to go and conduct the work and pay the taxes that was expected of them. And then when they have rounded off, they actually took the women as well with them. When they finished that exercise, one of the women that was abducted, her name will be known as Kafucha. One of those contractors who were compelling them to pay taxes and come and work in the plantations, they got drunk, and then in his drunken state, he actually instructed that Kafucha be brought to him, and he forcibly had sex with the woman. When the news filtered into the ears of Kafucha's husband, he went to confront the colonial guys who were coming who perpetrated this crime. He went out to confront him, but he was beaten mercilessly. The description says that his clothes was torn, and there were kind of bruises all over his body. Then he went back. And then this contractor, rather than produce an exact version of what happened, he kept some part of the story and went to make a report about how this guy has come to confront him. So this kind of brawl started creating what was called a subtle uprising. And then after his report, Balo was asked to go back to that community in the Kwilu region to go and ask, or to go and collect the taxes that these guys were not able to do. And then when Balo arrived in Kilamba on June 8, this was in 1931, accompanied by a single soldier and some messengers, he was met by the husband of Kafucha, supported by some 30 men, village men. Kafucha's husband challenged Balo to hit him. Balo ordered the soldier to fire in the air. But the mob that came with Kafucha's husband did not disband. Balo then fired his hunting rifle and wounded one of the mob. Thereupon, Kafucha's husband hit Balo with a knife or machete, and arrows were shot at him, killing him. His body was dismembered, and the pieces were distributed to chiefs of several villages. This singular act that happened will spark what in the history books is referred to as the Pende Revolt of the 1930s. And the history made it clear that it was in that revolt, or it was to capture that revolt that the artist created this piece of sculpture. Now, I'm not going to go deep into that history. I just created this short thing to explain what that piece of sculpture is. I'm going to tell the story of the collaboration because my intention here is to speak to the idea of collaboration. When Michael was doing the introduction this evening, he had listed some of the things that I've written up to the most recent one. They all strike a chord, making collaboration with institutions in the African continent. And a significant part of my presentation when I was coming for this position, I had stressed the need for us to collaborate with institutions in the African continent. Not only because it is the right thing to do, but it is very pertinent that we continue in that light, because knowledge creation of the materials that came out from the African continent is supposed to be a mutual thing, because Africa is a living continent. And the forebears of the ancestors who made those pieces are still in existence. And the information they bring to the table, why we are producing knowledge out of this material, is also very vital, because it will help to create a holistic understanding of the material. So very early on in 2016, when I came to work with Richard and the team, we had already started tinkering around the idea of involving source community or cultures where these objects were produced when we are making analysis or writing about the pieces. I have continued in that light. And so the story of this loan, in the very nature of many African art objects, was riddled with complexities. If any of you follow the story of the piece, the museum was published and casted in a very dark light as an institution that collected that is in possession of a stolen art piece and doesn't want to give it back to the people that own it. The story in the press was numerous, not only in America, but I think spread around Europe. And then the story about how the first contact with the Congolese art collective, with the VMFA, was such that the VMFA was already working a way to get the loan out to them. And then they stopped the negotiation, or they stopped the process of negotiating to get a loan for the piece of sculpture, went to the museum website without permission, took images and tried to make NFTs out from the sculpture. as at the time this was happening, there was already a huge controversy about, creating NFTs of African art and how that is going to affect the market of, acquiring African art. It was in the thick of this, complex maneuvering that I came to the Virginia Museum of Fine Art. I haven't sat on my seat to begin my work. All the papers that have been written about Ballot and all the controversies it's generated was dropped on my table by Michael Taylor. That was a very nice way to start a role. Any time I go and talk in a social gathering, they always ask me, "Are you going to send something back to Africa?" Even when I delivered my first Secos lecture in October of 2022, December 2022, I talked about a Benin piece, that the museum has just one piece. After my talk, somebody said, "Benin art is that very controversial one. Are you going to return it back to Benin?" I know that I boldly said, "No, I'm not returning it." And I gave a reason. I gave some reasons why. One of the reasons I always give about the Benin piece is that in 1997, I was still in college in Benin City, Nigeria, when the King of Benin was delivering a lecture to mark the centenary celebration of the invasion of Benin in 1897. He gave a very long, very lucid presentation. And then it got to a point where he spoke about the objects that were looted from Benin in 1897. At the end of his presentation, he made it clear that Benin requests that the objects come back. But he left that with a caveat. He says, not all of them should come back, that some of them should be out there as outliers to show the world what the Benin artists were able to create. I always hold that particular admonition since 1997. And so when I argue that I'm not going to let ours go back to Benin, not just now, I always tell them the story. And I also remind them that we only have one of the Benin object, only one. And we don't think that it is our property, because when we present the object to our audience, even if we publish things about the object, we still refer to the object as Benin object. And it came to the time where they say, what if the Benin people ask for it? I'll tell them, yes, they can have it if they ask for it. But in line with what an Oba of Benin had declared, Oba is the king, in line with what the Oba of Benin has declared, I do not think that owning just one of the Benin pieces that fall within that category of 1897 is completely wrong. The case of Benin, if I go talking about Benin, I may stray away from the reason why we are here tonight. But the case of Benin is a very fascinating one that you will see more when the new wing is created in 2028, because we intend to get some more Benin pieces in the collection. So the negotiation, so when I started work, all the things about Ballot that has been in the news was on my desk, and I started sifting through them. I found a lot of confusion in the back and forth negotiation going on, and all the accusation and counter-accusation. And I will also make it clear that in this confusion, the art collective and their backer had even accused Professor Herbert Weiss, that collected this piece in 1972, as being a thief. I think it got to the point where those confusion became really very heightened, And Herbert Weiss, I have sat with him in a panel in Cologne in 2023 when we were analyzing the piece. He was really very vexed about that kind of accusation. it turned out that the whole idea that the art collective came was to loan the piece. But on a lighter note, the language with which they were looking for to loan the piece was the language that was very condemning. They were asking for the piece to return, which indicates that the piece was stolen. So in few of the presentations that I gave around the country and even outside of the country, all pointed to one thing, that the piece in question wasn't stolen, just like I declared at the very beginning of my talk tonight. It wasn't stolen. And because of that, and in line with my philosophy of making collaborations with the African continent, the huge documents in front of me, I was going to take pain to go through each pages to make sure I find the contours and find where the problems lie. Because I felt that, this may be the first and the most major challenge for me, who appear as an African and curating the African art collection in an American museum. This duality of being an American and being an African has actually casted me to be like a dual personality. But I know that the African side of me is more stronger. Sometimes, maybe all the time. So when I went through all the piece of paper, I think I was then better prepared to engage with this group. And that engagement would start in 2023, when I participated in the European Council for African Studies biannual conference that was held in Cologne in Germany. At that conference, I represented the case of Ballot out there. And then it was at that conference that one of the backers of the art collective in the Congo by the name Renzo Martin met with me for the first time. I say met with me for the first time, but he had already been speaking about me even behind me. He said that the VMFA hired the African art curator to block any chances for them to get the pieces without even having one conversation with me. So when we got to work, I looked at everything that was on board, and I discovered one very important thing: communication. And I think I brought that out to Michael at some point. It looked as if there were a lot of meaning of the word get confused during translation, because first and foremost, the language of the Congolese art collective is being spoken through the two major languages out there called the Kikongo and the Lingala. These two languages will now be converted through a process. It becomes Dutch. And then from the Dutch version, they now make the English translation. So when this one word goes round and then come to the American consciousness, it becomes something different. So when we discovered that, we now started working back with the art collective again. And as luck will have it, or what they call coincidence, Renzo Martin and a Moroccan-Dutch curator, Hisham Khalidi, were given a grant from the Mondrian Fund in the Netherlands to be the artist and curator that will represent the Dutch pavilion at the Venice Biennial that was last year. And so with that new award, and in line with their still a request to get this artwork loaned to the Congo, we then had to go on another layer of negotiation, pardoning both the insults and the activities that has happened before now, which included going to the museum website without permission, downloading objects to create NFTs. And then with that renewed energy, we worked with this group. From that 2023, when I came back from Cologne, We worked with this group all through the end of 2023, so that by the end of 2023, we already were at a very good position to make the loan happen. And then early in 2024, we are now going to put into practice what we have been negotiating for these past few months. And then the issue of logistics was now going to pop up. Who was going to go with the peace to the Congo? That's going to be a very long trip. We looked at all the possibilities. And then, in line with what my late father will always tell me, for you to prove a point, you must subject yourself to whatever test that is in front of you. When we were kind of getting gridlock about how the work was going to travel, I then offered myself and say, I will go with Balo to the Congo. And I believe quite a number of people who heard me say that were in shock. Now, why do I have to do that? I said, well, in line with what we are preaching, we have to make sure that we get this loan sent to the Congo. But the journey of going to the Congo was not just flying into Kinshasa, which is the capital of the Congo, and then drop the piece and walk away, or come back here and wait for them to finish what they were doing. The journey to the Congo was actually the beginning of even a longer journey that will follow. So in March of 2024, me and the piece of sculpture, we were ready to go on that voyage. All packed up here in Richmond, Virginia. I sat in the truck with the crate carrying Balo. We traveled to Washington, D.C., where we were going to fly out that same day in the evening. We got to the airport. We were all loaded and about to fly. And then the plane developed some kind of weird fault that couldn't make it fly that night. We were asked to go back and stay in a hotel and come back the next day. And when we came back the next day, I think the whole flight schedule had been altered. So we flew from Washington, D.C. to Brussels, Belgium. And then when we got to Brussels, the original flight that would have taken Balo from Brussels going to Kinshasa, because we didn't come on time, had already changed. And then we had to wait. I had to stay in Brussels for 3 days, waiting for the next connection. But we were determined because we have gotten to that point where we feel that, this is worth doing. So that belief and that resolve to, accomplish our goals and intentions as an institution, I stayed there for 3 days doing nothing. How boring that can be, especially when I didn't travel with my laptop. We stayed there, and then on the third day, a flight was going to take us to Kinshasa, which is the capital of the Congo DRC. So when we got to Kinshasa, right in the evening, I was checked in to go and sleep, and the next day we were going to leave at 10 a.m. But before then, I had been told, somewhat incorrectly, that I'm going to travel from Kinshasa to Lusanga right about 6 to 8 hours. So I said, well, that is doable. But when we commenced that journey on the Sunday morning, it will take me 15 hours to get to Lusanga. We first of all got to a little village called Kitwit that was like the nearest village to Lusanga. And then from Kitwit, we're going to travel another 2 hours to get to Lusanga. And so we spent the whole day, the previous day, and then got to Lusanga the next day. When we got to Lusanga, I bet a lot of you here, if you were told that a trip was going to end between 6 and 8 hours, and then you did it 15 hours later, I wonder how you're going to feel. That's why you didn't see me here at all. I was seriously gasping for air, and I was very angry, and I kept on telling myself, why did I come on this trip? I should have just stayed back in my office. So Balo got to Lusanga, and then we were going to bring it out. And when Balo came out from that truck, see the crowd of people who came out to welcome a piece of sculpture, which they said was created to trap the malevolent spirit of Balo, or of the colonial administration that ran that part of the world at that time. And some of the reasons why they wanted Balo back was to make Balo recompense, to help them rejuvenate the land that probably continuous cropping has eroded after many years. The essence of that I am still working on, because I don't know how a malevolent spirit can placate for something positive like they are declaring. But when we got there, the excitement that greeted the air was what actually motivated me, that gave me the more courage that what we are doing was the right thing. From the spot we stopped to unload Balo from the truck, there was no motorable way to the actual location where they have the museum that is called a White Cube in the village of Lusanga. And because there was nothing like that, we had to put Balo in a boat. And we drove in the boat from where the truck was parked up to where we can find land to take Balo to the museum. The event of that day was not just going to be, get Balo out and put it in the museum. No. There were going to be a lot of activities, celebration, because it was like they expected this thing to come back home, and they were going to greet it with all this kind of pomp and pageantry that will go with it. Allowing the piece of sculpture participate in those kinds of things from the Western perspective will look very unethical. You don't need to let it be used in that light. But all those worries were mitigated because we understand that the object was made and used within certain context as at the time they were created. And so it will not be completely out of place to allow folks in the community where it was made to manipulate the sculpture the way they wanted. And so there was a great celebration. And I think I am going to declare that it was the celebration and the excitement in the air that actually helped me manage the anger of sitting in a truck for over 15 hours going to a village. So, that house you see there is what is referred to as the White Cube Museum in Lusanga. When I first got to the White Cube, I kept asking myself, is this truly a museum? I think it was in a conversation that I actually realized what was going on there. it's called the White Cube Museum, but it's actually a mockery of the White Cube Museum in the West. So Ballot was asked, or was loaned because they want to complete a performance to create a spectacle. But even in the midst of that spectacle, there were a lot of exciting part of Ballot, the loaning of the Ballot piece to the art collective in Lusanga. Some of those were some of the things you see on the left-hand side of the slide. That little hut, I'm going to play a short clip towards the end of the slides for you to catch a glimpse of how exciting the community or the village was when this piece of sculpture came back. So that white cube, that building you saw there, was just a house built. It wasn't a museum. It was just a big empty house. And the sculptural piece, Ballot, was going to be displayed inside the white cube alone. And then the Ballot sculpture will be live streamed from inside the white cube, and it will be fed to the Dutch pavilion in Italy, in Venice, in Italy, because the Dutch artist Renzo Martin and the Dutch Moroccan curator Hisham Khalidi were the ones curating the Dutch pavilion at the thing. And the artist was working, Renzo Martins was working with the art collective in the Congo, and their products was going to be the focus of the Dutch pavilion last year. So after all this wonderful greeting and celebration, Ballot came into the white cube, where I will then have to also conduct a ritual of opening or bringing Ballot out from the crate, because all this time Ballot was securely kept in a crate that I traveled with. So having brought out Ballot and mounted it, there was going to be another ritual to welcome him. You will observe at the foot of Ballot is a cocoa pod. They brought it to give to Ballot as a way to welcome him. I couldn't put all the numerous pictures that I came back with, but there were some times where they had to go and get some leaves from the farm around. I know that leaf very well, but I don't know the Congolese name, but I know that in the Benin language where I specialize in, it's called the Ewere leaf. It's the leaf that helps remove negative forces. So that leaf was used to pelt Ballot, to tell him welcome. And then there were a lot of singing and dancing and prayer and supplication. And then when all this was concluded, you can actually see, well, you may not see it very clearly, but my face was dripping. I was sweating. I told somebody that for nearly 20 years I have not suffered from what we used to call heat rashes. But in March of last year, that actually happened to me in Lusanga in the Congo. And then we got Ballot all set up in Lusanga. And then the tech guys, they did all their hookups. And then it was time to heat Venice. That projection you see there was a screen that was telecasting Ballot from the village in Lusanga into the Dutch pavilion at the Venice Biennial. This was like around the White Cube Museum in Lusanga, where some other objects was kept around the museum. So they were actually capturing scene from Lusanga into the Dutch pavilion at the Venice Biennial. And a lot of works that was created by the art collective was also, also feel that Dutch pavilion at the Biennial. And for those who saw the Dutch pavilion last year, a lot of them had numerous things to say about how that was carried out. But I think this was where we now got to the climax of the reason why Ballot loan was wanted by the art collective from the very beginning. According to Renzo Martin, the artist, and Hisham Khalidi, the idea was to show Ballot in a remote village, make it appear in a Western institution, and then speak to what they were describing as creating a notoriety to both the art collective and the art piece. But the way I understood it was creating this awareness that even an art collective in a small village in Africa can reach out and be part of the bigger art art conversation at the global stage, which was a good one. Again, that fell in line with my idea of collaborations. So I got to the Dutch pavilion. I saw almost all the art collective. They came to see their piece at the Dutch pavilion, and they participated in all the programs. I think some people even said that the Dutch pavilion was one of the most active because there was continuous drumming and dancing, which you are going to see towards the end of my slides. It's interesting to know that, haven't conducted this ritual of loaning a piece from the VMFA to a village in Lusanga, in the Congo DRC. The Virginia Museum already started to put into practice those things that we declare when we signed up to work here since the summer of 2022. A close shot at the piece. I remember in a friendly conversation I had with somebody some time ago about this piece. We always came to the point where we usually laugh at it and say that had Richard Woodward, Herbert Weiss, and Zoe Strutter not sat to write about this piece, referring to it as art with a fight in it, how significant would this piece have been in our consciousness? It potentially could be. The Venice Biennial ended in November of last year. And then the journey of Ballot would continue again. It wasn't going to come back to the VMFA. Not just yet. So after the Venice Biennial, the Van Abbe Museum in Eindhoven in the Netherlands made a request to show everything that was displayed at the Dutch pavilion at their museum. And that will include getting the physical Ballot sculpture from Lusanga to Eindhoven in the Netherlands for them to carry out that exhibition. And that loan was approved so that we can still continue to, expand upon these, travels of the piece. And then, now I was very prepared. I know that I was going to travel 15 hours from Kinshasa to Lusanga. I was no longer expecting to travel for 8 hours and then end up 15. So I got prepared again in November to go back to Lusanga to get the piece. And the journey went very well. I got back to Lusanga, collected Balo, jumped in the plane, although I'm making it sound simple. But when I collected Balo and jumped in the plane, Balo couldn't leave the same time with me. I got to Brussels and I had to wait for 2 or so days for Balo to come. So when we got it, we then took it to the Van Abbe Museum in Eindhoven, where an exhibition was set up. And the title of that exhibition was Two Sides of the Same Coin, speaking about the need for Western institutions to collaborate with institutions in Africa and so many other parts of the world where colonialism occurred, and kind of finding middle grounds, which is collaborate so that we can find a way to work together or move forward. An exciting thing happened when we got to the Van Abbe Museum in Eindhoven. I was invited to come and sit in a panel. They always wanted me to speak about the potency of African art objects. But at this panel, something intriguing happened. So you see me stand beside Balo when it was displayed. It's displayed alongside the other works of the art collective. And then on the right-hand side, you see a lady. The name of that lady is Madame Dominique Thibault. She happened to be the great niece of Balo, the story I told at the beginning. She is the great niece of Balo. And she came to that exhibition because, according to her, in the spirit of reconciliation and also to make peace with the stories that she had growing up, she came with some documents, the letters that Balo was writing, as at the time he was stationed in the Congo in the 1930s. She wanted for the world to see how her uncle described the place where he was asked to go and work. Those letters were written in Dutch. And it has not been translated until now. I think after the exhibition, the intent is that they are going to try to translate it to English so we can see the English version. But some of the things I understood from the letters was how he described the place he was sent to and how the people of the place respected and treated he and his wife. Said they were treated like royals. Such description is quite intriguing. Such description tells of one thing: the volume of respect that the African can actually give when the time comes. But I think Madame Thibault's presence at that panel presentation in Eindhoven in late January was very significant. Because before her appearance, we know that in the press, Balo's wife made a declaration about the killing of her husband. But also, she spoke about the injustices of colonialism. Madame Thibault, in her 70s, has come now to also, according to her, to apologize for whatever happened to the Congolese people at that time, but also to show how his great uncle saw the people and the land that he was asked to govern at the time. Balo is currently showing at the Van Abbe Museum until sometime in March. And as we were waiting for Balo to come back, we have been hinted that the K21 Museum in Dusseldorf are interested to also say something about the Balo story. And I ask you tonight, if it will be a good idea for that journey to continue. Left to me, I would say yes, but I leave the other question to you. These are the 4 pages of the letter that Madame Dominique Thibault contributed, and it was displayed right in that exhibition that is currently ongoing at the Van Abe Museum in Eindhoven. I have arranged it exactly the way it appeared. The 2 top at the first and the second page, the lower one and the third and the fourth page. That was how she brought it, and that was how it was exhibited. Oops, sorry. At the arrival of Ballot in Lusanga in March of 2024, a lot of things happened. And this video clip was what I captured with my phone. It's interesting that I show this short clip that is going to take us just 2 minutes to watch. In this video, you will just pay close attention to see how excited the people were. But at the very tail end of the video, you will see how creative the art collective and the village were in presenting Ballot, or in welcoming Ballot back to Lusanga. And that very part told me a lot. I hope you will enjoy it.
Merci, thank you. Je dois le pardonner quand même. Maintenant, c'est le moment où, si chacun veut visiter les Kisendu, on va entrer un à un. Moko na ordre pe okoumela te okosa nini shukute seconde 5 pe mokie kitana 3 4 OK toko banda na ba o basali boso mulongo ti toko silisa ceux qui va se lequer belé toko kota même deux
Yeah, this is the part I was talking about. You see how Ballot was brought to be in the midst of other works that were created. And it was going to be like a welcome story for a piece of sculpture that was made to trap the spirit of negative forces. But it's also very important to show how the community welcomed back a piece that will eventually come back to Lusanga, having been away from there for over 5 decades. It taught me quite a number of lessons. One, in line with the spirit of collaboration, anything is possible. Secondly, it challenged me to find more creative ways to continue to collaborate. That was why I declare in what I call our intentions that we will continue to collaborate with cultural institutions in the African continent in any number of ways. It could be by collecting works from Africa, which we have actually started doing even a lot more effusively this past few years. Michael described to you how the VMFA has commissioned the construction of a masquerade that towers up to 15 feet that will come to the VMFA when the new wing is opened. We have also acquired quite a number of things. So if those who would like to go see the current African Art Gallery, there's a focus space there where some of the recent things we have acquired is displayed. And I also say that it's not, and then we will continue to foster new relationships in the continent with artists and everything. I said that because I recently attended the 154 Contemporary African Art Fair in Marrakesh in Morocco. Venues like that are everywhere. I've also attended one that they call the Art X in Lagos. So while we are fostering new relationships, we will not forget to maintain the ones we have already. In doing so, we are not only living up to our commitment, but we are also showing what I call respect to the African continent. Because if we don't do this, if we look as if Africa is a static place where nothing happens. But while we're doing this, we understand the dynamics, we understand the organic nature of the continent and how it is, kind of going about a thing on a daily basis. As an institution, only the VMFA cannot do it. It has to be a collective effort. I'm part of an exhibition group that Amanda Maple, the current African Art Curator at the New Orleans Museum of Art, put together. New masquerade and artistic innovations and collaborations. This exhibition will not only live in that triad of showing in America and Europe and going back to sleep. As I speak, the exhibition has 3 venues in Africa, and probably we may get more, it all depends. And some of the venues is going to be in Sierra Leone, Senegal, and in southeastern Nigeria, the part they call Calabar. Such kind of work is needed for us to continue to explore and exploit. And I make bold to say that the VMFA stand at the forefront of continuing in that light. Before I finish tonight, I'm going to leave just a very small snippet into an exciting part that is going to happen when the new wing is created. We are currently in the works to acquire a Benin art collection that is very significant in number, but also significant in what it's going to do for both the VMFA museum, the broader museum in the country, and also to those of us who also work within the academic arena studying the history of African art. What that collection would do to us is it will help us try to cover over 100 years historical gap in the study and understanding of Benin art. Benin art is but one of the many that such work is needed. I thank the VMFA to have allowed us go in this route. And I hope that in few years to come, we will sit and reel at the progress that we have made. Thank you all for coming out tonight.